Hello, one and all, and congratulations for making it here. You are to the Constitution Test Review. Wonderful work getting to this point. We are in the final stretch of the class. Hopefully, you are ready to take this Constitution test, or at the very least, ready to start studying for it. Every word that I say from here on out is going to be very important, and it will either appear on either your Constitution test for the U.S. Constitution or for the Missouri Constitution. Remember that there's two tests, you got to pass both of them. So what we're going to start today is the process of finishing up your review and getting you prepared for those tests. At the end of the video, I'll talk a little bit more about where you can find some more resources to help you out. But without further ado, let's hope you've got this kind of sideways page instead of the regular page. You can flip over to the very first part where it says U.S. Constitution Test Review. You're in the final stretch. This is the last set of notes that you're going to take for this class. So again, congrats. All right. We started the class talking about where governments originally came from. We talked a little bit about the different theories from people like Tom Hobbes and John Locke. We talked a little bit about early American governments, about the Mayflower Compact, where the Pilgrims decided that they were going to agree to a certain set of rules. That was kind of the first set of laws that the American colonists had. And then we also talked about the Declaration of Independence on 1776. That was when that was signed, and that was kind of what got us off to our first form of government here in America. But you probably remember that the Articles of Confederation were our first attempt at government, but we eventually decided to get rid of them. We decided to throw those in the trash and to come up with a new constitution. They met in the same place at a place called Independence Hall. It is currently on the back of the $100 bill. And George Washington was chosen to be the leader of the group. Eventually, he'd be chosen as our first president, but for now, he was just kind of the leader. The Constitution was eventually signed, or to put a fancy vocab word on it, it was eventually ratified by all 13 states. And it is split up into 7 different sections that we call articles. In addition to that, there are 27 amendments. You will have to know the first 10. Those are called the Bill of Rights. You won't need to know the number of the amendment, but you will not have to know the rights and the freedoms that are protected by them. The last 17 amendments, you will not need to know. So let's start off with the first 7 articles. The first one is the legislative branch. Every time we've talked in class about the 3 branches, I always say legislative, executive, judicial, because that's the order that they're in the Constitution. And the founding fathers, or the framers, put the legislative branch first because they wanted to show everybody how we were making laws. That is the legislative branch's main job, is to make the laws. And they're made up of 2 groups of people, 2 chambers or 2 houses, which means that they are bicameral. Remember that prefix bi means 2, like bicycle has 2 wheels. We're a bicameral legislature. We're made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Reps is that blank in your notes, and it is the title of the first group of people. In the House of Reps, the membership is dependent on population. There are 435 members, and depending on the population of a state, the state gets more people. Each state has at least 1 person in the House of Reps. They are led by somebody called the Speaker of the House, who is elected by the representatives and is usually the leader of the majority party. And the House of Reps is kind of special because all bills that have to do with taxes have to start in the House of Reps. In order to become a member of this Chamber of Congress, you have to be 25 years old, a citizen for 7 years. You have to live in the district that you represent. That means that if someone wants to represent St. Louis, they have to live in St. Louis. They can't live in Kansas City because St. Louis and Kansas City have different needs. Representatives serve 2-year terms and can serve as many times as they want. There are people who have been House of Reps members for more than 30 years. They make their whole career out of it. The Senate, on the other hand, is based on equality, and each state gets 2 votes, which means that if we eventually get a 51st state, maybe Puerto Rico, maybe Guam, maybe somewhere else, then we would bump up to 102 members in the Senate. They're led by the president pro tempore, who again is elected by the members in the Senate and is the leader of the party, which means if there are more Democrats in the Senate, the president pro temp is probably going to be the leader of the Dems. They're special because all bills that have to do with foreign affairs have to start. Sorry about that, folks. All bills that have to do with foreign affairs start here. So if we decide to declare war on another country, the Senate is the one who starts that process. They also approve of presidential appointments. So people like judges that are nominated by the president have to be approved by the Senate. In order to be a senator, you have to be 30 years old, a citizen for 9 years, and live in the state that you represent. And they serve longer terms. They serve 6-year terms. But again, they can be a senator for as long as they can keep getting re-elected. We talked a lot about how a bill becomes a law in this class. You probably remember that from Unit 3. There was a big, long section of notes where you were talking all about how a bill becomes a law. We are not going to go over all of these different 15 steps again. Just refer back to your old notes, and you'll see in this section of notes, it says in big capital letters, it just says C notes. Make sure that you're familiar with at least the big ideas of how a bill becomes a law and what role committees play in it. If you flip over your notes page, you will see a big blank spot at the top of page review unit 3. And what you should do now is pause this video. I'm going to move my head out of the way here. And you'll need to know what the delegated powers are, so things that the national government can do, what the reserved powers are, the things that the state can do, and what the concurrent powers are, the things that both of them can do. So again, pause this video now, copy down this Venn diagram or the 3-column chart, however you want to do it, and I'll see you on the next slide. Okay. When we're talking about checks and balances, there's one last thing I want to mention before we move on to the next branch. The legislative branch has the power to override a presidential veto. That's going to come into play in a second when we talk a little bit more about the president, but Congress is able to override a presidential veto, which means even if the president says no to Congress's idea, Congress can still override it and still do it anyways if they get enough votes. All right, let's move on to the executive branch. The main job of the executive branch is to enforce the laws or to execute the laws. That's where we get the title executive from. They're executing the laws or enforcing the laws. And this is the largest branch in the government. It may just seem like it's the president and the 10 or 12 people who work for them, but in reality, this is the biggest branch because there is huge groups of people who work for the president. Even if you just think about the Army is just one branch in the military, but they're technically part of the executive branch. The president is the leader, the vice president is the next in line, and then there is a number of cabinet members after that. In order to become president, you have to be 35 years old. You have to be a naturally born citizen, which means you either have to be born in America or your parents are American citizens. And you have to live in America for at least 14 years. So if you have not lived in America for at least 14 years, then you are not allowed to be president, even if you are born here. We've got the same qualifications for the vice president because, as you might remember, the vice president's main job is to be ready to step in case the main president can't do the job. So he or she has to have the same qualifications and make sure that they can be president if they're called upon to do so. The presidents are chosen by the Electoral College. Again, that is hopefully something you remember from Unit 4. The elections are held in November. They figure out who wins in each state. That state usually gives all of its votes to one candidate, and then they add up the Electoral College votes, and then whoever gets the majority is eventually inaugurated, which means they take office in January of the next year. This is all outlined in the 12th Amendment, but again, you don't really need to know that, and I don't think I put it in your notes. Oh, I guess it is. Yeah, in the 12th Amendment. That used to be something that was on the Constitution test, but isn't anymore. Anyways, moving on. The president has powers just like Congress does. We talked about the roles of the president. We did a couple of activities if you're following the normal standard operating procedure of the class. And those roles are things like commander-in-chief, which means they're the leader of the military. They get to grant pardons and reprieves, which means they can forgive people for their crimes. They get to make appointments, so they can recommend and nominate people for different jobs, but the Senate has to approve of them. They're in charge of foreign affairs, so they decide which countries we do business with and which countries we ignore or refuse to do business with. They're also in charge of negotiating treaties. And the president is in charge of vetoing and pocket vetoing. The pocket veto is something we'll talk a little bit more about when we're talking about Missouri government, but the presidential veto gets to stop bills from turning into laws, unless, of course, Congress overrides it. They also have some informal powers, like the idea of enforcing and offering executive orders, which is like a law without Congress. An example of that is when the President Biden suggested and said that anybody who rides a plane during the worst days of the pandemic, they had to wear masks on planes, on buses, on trains. So there was something that he wanted to get done quick, didn't have time to wait around for Congress, so he decided to do it through an executive order. An executive agreement is like a treaty, but without Congress. So maybe they want to make short-term deals, or maybe they want to decide things like something to do with getting rid of nuclear bombs. They can make a treaty with another country to destroy 1,000 of their bombs and 1,000 of our bombs. That can be done through executive agreement. And executive privilege is the ability to keep secrets from the nation if it is for the sake of national security. So the president is allowed to lie legally if it can be justified that it's done in the interest of the nation. All right, last branch. This one's going to be short. The judicial branch is the one that interprets the laws. They are the ones who decide if a law should be there and if someone violated it. So that's what we mean when we say interpret the laws. Our court system is split up into different types of courts. On one hand, we've got federal and state courts. On the other hand, we've got criminal and civil courts. So depending on what someone is upset about or depending on what law someone broke, they might go to different types of courts. But at the very top, the tippy top of our court system is the Supreme Court. The National Supreme Court has the ultimate say on what is or is not allowed in America. That idea of saying what laws are good and what should be allowed is called judicial review. And if they decide that a law or a presidential action goes against the Constitution, then that law or action has to be stopped right away. And the people who are in charge of that are just 9 people in America, the 9 Supreme Court members that sit on the Supreme Court. They're called justices instead of judges. And the main person is in charge. It's a little obstructed there, but they're led by the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice is the one in charge of the court system. We have this graph a couple of times. You probably just saw it in Unit 5 if you have done Unit 5 recently. But again, what I want you to do is pause this video, make sure that you're jotting down this structure. You will need to know things like the fact that the Supreme Court's on top, but Missouri also has a Supreme Court. You'll need to know these different styles of courts. So pause it, and when you come back, we'll talk about how to be a judge. Okay, in this slideshow, I've got it up here. We've talked about it in Unit 5 recently. This is another instance of what used to be on the Constitution test, but is no longer. So you just draw that diagram. We're going to skip past this one for now. Okay, how to be a judge. Judges are usually elected on the state level. They serve 12-year terms, so every judge in Missouri, even our Supreme Court judges, have to be elected. But the federal judges are appointed by the president and then approved by the Senate, and they get to be there for life. There are other courts that we're not going to talk about. We mentioned it back in Unit 5, but there are things like the military courts and the tax courts, but they aren't really going to be on your Constitution test or anything like that. And if you ever find yourself in a military court or a tax court, seek a lawyer right away. Probably won't happen, though, unless you sign up for the military and then run away or try to defraud the government with your taxes. So don't do that, and you'll be good to go. This is where this video is going to stop. We have got just a couple more other articles, and then we'll get into the amendments in the next video. But good job getting here. Remember these three branches. Remember their main job. I'll see you next time after you kind of digest this material and are ready for a little bit more. See you then.